My hands trembled as I held the note, my breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. The world tilted, threatening to tip me over the edge of sanity. It had been tucked neatly under the coffee mug he left on the kitchen table every morning. A mug I'd come to associate with the warmth and stability of our life together. Only today, the cheerful smiley face painted on its side seemed to mock me. I sat down trying to steady myself. The words danced before my eyes, the pristine handwriting so achingly familiar. Anna, I don't know where to begin. You've always deserved honesty, and I've been too much of a coward to give it to you. Please know that everything I've done, every meal cooked, every gift given, has been an attempt to make up for what I've stolen from you. I hope in some small way it's helped. My mind refused to process it at first. This was a joke, I thought, or a misunderstanding. Daniel, my Daniel, wasn't capable of anything that would require this. He was perfect, the perfect husband. For 10 years he had been my everything. The man who never missed an anniversary, who kissed me goodnight even after the longest of days. He remembered every detail, my favorite flower peonies, my comfort food when I had the flu, tomato soup with grilled cheese, the way I liked the laundry folded, a habit I didn't even realize I had until he did it better than me. He was the dream every woman hoped for, the storybook prince who made all others pale in comparison. But now that prince was suddenly a stranger. I stared at the note, willing the words to change, to rearrange themselves into something benign. But they didn't. My pulse roared in my ears as the house fell into a suffocating silence. I scanned the kitchen, searching for any clue, any sign that this wasn't real. My eyes landed on the bouquet of roses he'd left that morning. It was our routine, small, thoughtful gestures that never felt routine. Roses. Red ones. The kind I loved. But not my favorite color. The weight of it hit me like a blow. That bouquet, like everything else, was a calculated move. Guilt disguised as love. I clutched the note tightly, crumpling its edges, and ran my fingers over the words as though touching them would make them less true. I read it again, my heart sinking as the meaning took hold. Make up for what I've stolen from you. I was on my feet before I realized it, pacing the length of the kitchen. Questions swirled around me, dark and unforgiving. What had he done? Was it money? A secret from his past? An affair? My stomach churned at the thought, but I dismissed it almost immediately. Daniel wasn't capable of betrayal. He loved me too much, too well. But the doubt had taken root. It whispered in my ear, urging me to dig deeper. I picked up my phone, hesitating as my thumb hovered over his name in my contacts. I could call him, demand an explanation. But some instinct, primal and raw, told me not to. Not yet. Instead, I called Sarah. Sarah had been my best friend since college. She was the maid of honor at our wedding, the person who held my hand when my mother passed away, the first person I'd call when I needed advice or comfort. If anyone could make sense of this, it was her. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice bright and familiar. Anna? Hey, what's up? I swallowed hard, unsure how to even begin. I need to talk to you. Something's wrong. Her tone shifted immediately, concern bleeding into her words. What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it Daniel? The mention of his name made my throat tighten. I think so. He left me a note this morning. Something about something he's done. There was a pause, barely perceptible, but enough to set my nerves on edge. What kind of note? She asked carefully. Just cryptic. He said he's been trying to make up for something. I don't know, Sarah. I don't know what's going on. My voice cracked and I felt tears sting my eyes. I'm sure it's nothing, she said, but there was a strange tension in her voice now, a brittle edge I didn't recognize. You know how Daniel is. Always overthinking everything. Maybe he's feeling guilty about something small, like forgetting to take out the trash. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But something about her response felt wrong. Forced. The call ended soon after, with Sarah promising to come by later that evening to talk. But as I hung up, a knot of unease settled in my chest. Her words had been soothing, but her tone hadn't. And when I replayed the conversation in my mind, I realized she'd never asked to see the note. The hours stretched endlessly until Daniel came home. He greeted me with his usual warm smile, leaning in to kiss my forehead. I stiffened, my heart pounding in my chest. Is everything okay? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I opened my mouth to confront him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, just a long day. That night, after he fell asleep, I crept into his office. It was a space I rarely ventured into, his private sanctuary full of books and neatly arranged files. My heart raced as I opened the top drawer of his desk. First, there was nothing. Just pens, paper clips, and the mundane detritus of a working man's life. But then I saw it. A folder tucked at the back, its edges worn from handling. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Some old, some new. All of them of Sarah. My breath hitched and my vision blurred as I stared at the images. There was no mistaking what they were. Smiling, candid shots of her. At the beach, at her house, even at our wedding. And then, tucked beneath the photographs, I found letters. Intimate, heartbreaking letters. Daniel's handwriting. The words painted a picture I didn't want to see. A reality I couldn't bear to face. They spoke of love, of regret, of years spent hiding a relationship that should never have existed. A relationship with her. I dropped the folder, my hands shaking as bile rose in my throat. It was true. All of it. The perfect husband, the perfect friend. They'd both been lying to me for years. I stumbled out of the office, my mind racing. Every moment of my marriage replayed itself in my head, now tainted by the knowledge of their betrayal. Every kind gesture, every thoughtful act. It had all been driven by his guilt, not love. The man I thought I knew didn't exist. And I was left with nothing but the shattered pieces of a life built on lies. I sat on the living room floor for what felt like hours, the folder abandoned somewhere behind me. My knees were pulled to my chest, my forehead resting on them, as I tried to breathe past the suffocating weight pressing down on me. How long had it been going on? How could I not have seen it? My mind churned, desperate for answers that only deepened the wound. Had I been blind, or had I simply refused to see? Daniel had always been so attentive, so thoughtful. But now every memory twisted into something grotesque. The way he always encouraged me to spend time with Sarah. The nights he'd stayed late at work when I was at her place. The way they laughed together, too easily, too intimately, when we had dinners as a trio. I thought about confronting him that very moment. Dragging him out of bed and demanding the truth. But the idea terrified me. I wasn't ready to hear his excuses or watch him crumble under the weight of his own guilt. I wasn't ready to see him admit that the man I loved was a lie. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. Called Sarah. Her voice, sleepy and confused, answered on the second ring. Anna? It's late. Are you okay? No, I said, my voice trembling. I need to see you. Now. She hesitated, but I could hear the panic in her voice. What's going on? Did something happen? Just come, I said, and hung up before she could argue. When Sarah arrived, she looked worried, her usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. She still wore the confidence that had always made her seem untouchable. But there was a crack in her facade tonight. She sat across from me on the couch, her legs crossed, hands resting on her knees, waiting. Anna, you're scaring me. What's this about? For a moment I couldn't speak. My eyes burned, my throat tightened, and all I could do was stare at her. Her face, so familiar, so dear to me, felt like a mask. A cruel imitation of the person I trusted most. I found something, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Something Daniel wrote. Her expression froze, but only for a fraction of a second. If I hadn't been watching so closely, I might have missed it. But I saw it. The way her eyes darted down, the way her shoulders tensed. What did he write? She asked carefully. He said he's been trying to make up for what he's done. That everything he's done for me, our life together, has been an apology. For stealing something from me. I leaned forward, my voice rising as my anger broke through the shock. What does that mean, Sarah? What has he stolen from me? She didn't answer. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. Her lips pressed tightly together. It was the first time I'd ever seen her at a loss for words. Say something. I demanded, tears streaming down my face. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me it's not what I think. Anna, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for it to happen. My stomach dropped. I shook my head, unable to process what I was hearing. What didn't you mean to happen? Her eyes met mine, wide and glistening with tears. I didn't mean to fall in love with him. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. The air left my lungs and for a moment I thought I might pass out. Fall in love? I repeated, my voice hollow. With my husband? With Daniel. It started before you two were even married, she said quickly, as if that somehow made it better. Back when we were all just friends. I didn't think it would last, Anna, I swear. I thought I could let it go once you got engaged. But then, she broke off, covering her face with her hands. But then what? I snapped. My voice was shaking, but the rage in it was undeniable. You just kept going? Behind my back. For 10 years. She sobbed into her hands, her shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, she whispered. I wanted to stop. So did he. But every time we tried. Stop, I said, cutting her off. Just stop. I don't want to hear about how hard it was for you to betray me. She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I was past caring. My entire world had just been upended, and she wanted my sympathy? I stood, pacing the room as my emotions churned in a storm of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To my marriage? To my life? How long were you planning to keep this secret? Forever. I don't know, she said helplessly. I thought maybe if I stayed away, things would get better. Stayed away. I laughed bitterly. You were in our wedding, Sarah. You were in every corner of my life. How is that staying away? I didn't know what else to do, she cried. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose him. Her words hit me like a slap. The audacity of it. The sheer selfishness. She didn't want to lose me, but she'd already stolen everything from me. My trust, my happiness, my husband. I turned to her, my voice cold and sharp. You need to leave. Anna, please, she said, standing. We can talk about this. We can. Get out. I shouted, pointing to the door. I can't even look at you right now. She hesitated as if she wanted to argue, but the look on my face must have convinced her otherwise. Without another word, she grabbed her coat and left, the door slamming shut behind her. I collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling as the weight of everything crashed down on me. The man I'd loved, the friend I'd trusted, they had both betrayed me in the worst possible way. And now I didn't know who I was without them. The hours passed in a blur. At some point, Daniel came downstairs, rubbing his eyes sleepily. He stopped when he saw me sitting in the dark, my tear-streaked face staring blankly ahead. Anna? He asked, his voice laced with concern. What's wrong? I turned to him, the man I thought I knew, and felt a wave of cold fury rise in my chest. I know, I said simply. His face fell. All the color drained from it, and his eyes widened in panic. You know. About you and Sarah, I said, my voice flat. About the lies. The guilt. All of it. For a moment he didn't move. Then he sank into the chair across from me, his head in his hands. Anna, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. Don't, I said sharply. Don't you dare apologize. Not after what you've done. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. It was a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. I never meant to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. A mistake? A mistake lasts a moment, Daniel. This lasted a decade. I love you, he said desperately. I've always loved you. Everything I've done. Everything you've done, I interrupted, has been for yourself, to ease your guilt, not for me. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He knew I was right. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I could forgive him, or if I even wanted to try. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces. Alone. The silence between us stretched, heavy and oppressive. Daniel remained in the chair, his head in his hands while I sat on the couch, arms wrapped tightly around myself, as if trying to hold together what was left of me. My mind kept replaying the same scenes, our wedding day, his careful, loving gestures, Sarah's smile as she stood by my side as my maid of honor. All of it was poison now, tainted by the truth. I don't even know who you are, I said finally, my voice shaking. All this time I thought I had the perfect husband, but you were lying to me. Every single day. I wasn't lying about how I feel about you, he said softly, raising his head to look at me. His eyes were red, swollen with unshed tears. Everything I did was because I love you. Love. I spat the word like it burned. You don't betray someone you love, Daniel. You don't spend years sneaking around with her best friend and call it love. His face crumpled, and for a brief, horrible moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But the weight of his betrayal crushed any trace of compassion. How long? I asked, the question spilling out before I could stop it. He blinked at me, confused. What? How long were you and Sarah together? I clarified, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. He hesitated, his eyes dropping to the floor. It started before we got married. A sharp gasp escaped me, and I pressed a hand to my mouth as the enormity of it sank in. Before we were married? My voice rose, shaking with disbelief. You stood there in front of our friends and family, and vowed to love me while you were. I couldn't finish the sentence. My throat tightened and the words choked me. I thought it was over, he said quickly, desperate to explain. I told her it had to stop, and for a while it did. But after the wedding, his voice trailed off and he didn't need to finish. I understood. After the wedding, they had picked up where they left off. Behind my back. In the shadow of the life we were building together. Why didn't you just end it? I asked, my voice cracking. If you didn't love her, why didn't you just stop? I tried, he said, his voice trembling. But it wasn't that simple. Sarah, she and I had this history. It wasn't just physical, Anna. We had a connection. But I didn't want to lose you. I couldn't imagine my life without you. Don't you dare try to make this about me, I snapped, fury boiling to the surface. This was never about protecting me or our marriage. This was about you. You wanted to have it all, and you didn't care what it would cost me. He flinched at my words but didn't argue. For once, he had the decency to remain silent. I stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. The walls of the living room felt like they were closing in, suffocating me. I need to get out of here, I said, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair. Anna, wait. He reached out as if to stop me, but I recoiled from his touch. Don't, I said coldly, glaring at him. Don't touch me. Don't say another word. I can't even look at you right now. He withdrew his hand, his shoulders slumping in defeat as I turned and walked out the door. The night air was sharp and cold, biting against my skin as I stepped onto the porch. For a moment I just stood there, staring out at the dark, quiet street. I had nowhere to go, no plan. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house with him, not after everything I'd learned. I ended up at a small park a few blocks away. It was empty at this hour, the swings swaying slightly in the wind, the faint hum of traffic in the distance. I sat on a bench staring blankly at the ground, my thoughts spinning in circles. How could I move forward from this? Was there even a way to repair the damage? Or was this the end of everything we'd built together? Part of me wanted to believe that he could change, that we could rebuild. But another part of me, the part that still felt raw and betrayed, screamed that it was impossible. I stayed there for what felt like hours, watching as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I hesitated before pulling it out. It was a message from Daniel. Please come home. We need to talk. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I love you. I stared at the screen, my heart heavy. His words meant nothing to me now. They were just more lies, more empty promises. I turned off my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I wasn't ready to face him again. Not yet. The next few days were a blur. I stayed with a friend from work, someone who didn't know Daniel or Sarah and wouldn't press me for details. I needed space, time to think. Daniel called and texted constantly, but I ignored him. Sarah tried to reach out as well, leaving voicemail after voicemail, but I deleted them all without listening. I wasn't ready to hear their excuses or apologies. I didn't want to hear how sorry they were or how much they regretted what they'd done. Their regret didn't erase the pain they'd caused, the years of lies and betrayal. By the end of the week, I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. I had to make a decision to figure out what my future would look like. But every time I tried to imagine it, all I saw was a void. A life without Daniel. A life without Sarah. A life where I didn't know who I was anymore. On Friday evening, I finally returned home. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. the air heavy with tension. Daniel was sitting on the couch, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with exhaustion and worry. He stood as soon as he saw me, taking a hesitant step forward. "Anna," he said softly, "thank God you're home." I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't. Just don't." He nodded, his shoulders slumping as he sank back onto the couch. I sat across from him, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. "I need answers," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "No more lies. No more half-truths. Just the truth. All of it." And so he told me. Everything. How it had started, how it had continued, and how he had tried, unsuccessfully, to end it. He told me about the guilt, the shame, and the fear of losing me. He told me that he had been terrified to tell me the truth because he knew it would destroy me. He was right about that. It had destroyed me. When he finished, he looked at me with tear-filled eyes, his hands trembling. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "But I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. If it means leaving, I'll leave. If it means fighting for us, I'll fight. Just tell me what you want, Anna." I stared at him, my heart aching with the weight of his words. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. But one thing was clear. The man sitting in front of me wasn't the man I thought I married. He was someone else entirely. "I need time," I said finally. "And space. I don't know what's going to happen, Daniel. But right now I just need to be alone." He nodded, tears streaming down his face, and I walked upstairs, closing the door behind me. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of clarity. My life was shattered, but maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to put the pieces back together. With or without him. The days stretched into weeks. After that night, Daniel moved out of the house. It wasn't a dramatic departure. No shouting, no slammed doors. He simply packed a bag and left, leaving the space between us as open and silent as a canyon. I didn't ask where he went, and he didn't volunteer the information. The only thing he told me before walking out the door was, "I'll be here if you need me." But I didn't need him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The house felt emptier without him. But it wasn't the absence of his physical presence that haunted me. It was the absence of what he represented. I had lost my husband, my partner, my sense of safety. Worse, I had lost the version of myself I thought I was when I was with him. For the first time in years, I had no one to anchor me. I drifted through my days, working, eating, sleeping, but nothing felt real. My coworkers noticed the change, their eyes filled with pity every time they passed me. I avoided their questions, brushing off their concern with forced smiles and vague reassurances. Sarah, to her credit, stayed away. Whether it was guilt or shame or maybe both, she didn't try to contact me again. That didn't stop her from lingering in my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. The easy smile she'd always worn around me now felt like a dagger in my chest. How could someone I trusted so deeply betray me like this? The truth was, I missed her as much as I hated her. Losing Sarah felt like losing a part of myself. She had been my confidant, my partner in crime. The one person who always seemed to understand me. And now, I didn't know if those memories were real, or if they had been tainted by the lies she'd been keeping. One Friday night, as I sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of tea, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my heart lurch. Sarah. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let the call go to voicemail like I had so many times before. But another part of me, a small stubborn part, wanted answers. Needed them. Picked up. "What do you want?" My voice was cold, sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. There was a pause on the other end, then a shaky breath. "Anna, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I couldn't go another day without trying to talk to you. Please, can we meet? Just once." I laughed bitterly. "You think I want to see you? After everything you've done?" "I know I don't deserve it," she said quickly. "But I need to explain. I need you to understand what happened." "What's left to explain, Sarah? You slept with my husband. For years. What could you possibly say that would make that better?" She was quiet for a moment and I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke again, her voice trembling. "It's not about making it better. It's about telling you the truth. You deserve that much." I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell her to leave me alone forever. But a part of me, The part that had spent weeks drowning in unanswered questions, couldn't let it go. Fine, I said finally. One conversation. That's all you get. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town. The kind of place we used to go together on lazy Saturday mornings. As soon as I walked in and saw her sitting at a table by the window, my chest tightened. She looked tired, her usually flawless appearance slightly disheveled. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, but I didn't smile back. I couldn't. I sat down across from her, crossing my arms. Talk, I said flatly. She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously in her lap. First, I want to say how sorry I am. For everything. I know that doesn't mean much, but I need you to know that. I didn't respond. I wasn't here for apologies. I was here for answers. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. When it started, I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't even think it would last. It was a stupid, selfish mistake, and I told myself it wasn't serious. But then, it got complicated. Complicated. I echoed, my voice rising. It got complicated because you didn't stop. You let it go on for years, Sarah. That's not complicated, that's cruel. I know, she said quickly, her voice cracking. You're right. It was cruel. And I hated myself for it. But I loved him, Anna. I know how awful that sounds, but it's the truth. I loved him, and I didn't know how to let him go. My stomach churned at her words. You loved him, I repeated, the bitterness dripping from my voice. Did you ever think about me? About what this would do to me if I found out? Of course I did, she said, tears streaming down her face now. Every day. That's why I tried to end it so many times. But I was weak. And so was he. I shook my head, disgusted. You were weak? That's your excuse. It's not an excuse, she said desperately. I know what we did was unforgivable. I wanted you to know the truth. That it wasn't about hurting you. I never wanted to hurt you, Anna. But you did, I said, my voice trembling. You destroyed everything. My marriage, our friendship. You took it all. She bowed her head, silent tears dripping onto the table. For a moment I just stared at her, unsure of what to feel. Anger? Sadness? Pity? Maybe all of it, tangled together in a mess I couldn't begin to unravel. Finally I stood, pulling my coat around me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Sarah, I said quietly. And honestly, I don't think I want to. But I needed to hear this. To understand. So thank you. I guess. She looked up at me, her face a mixture of hope and despair. Anna. Don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't call me again. Don't text me. Just stay out of my life. Her shoulders slumped and she nodded, accepting my words without argument. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was something. A step forward, however small. The weeks that followed were quiet. I spent a lot of time alone trying to piece myself back together. Daniel called occasionally, leaving voicemails that I never returned. I wasn't ready to face him again, not yet. I didn't know if I ever would be. But slowly, bit by bit, I started to heal. I redecorated the house, stripping away the remnants of our life together, and replacing them with something that felt more like me. I started therapy, forcing myself to confront the pain and anger I'd buried so deeply. And for the first time in years, I began to think about what I wanted, not as a wife or a friend, but as a person. As Anna. There were still bad days, of course. Days when the weight of the betrayal felt too heavy to bear. But there were good days too. And slowly the good days started to outnumber the bad. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever forgive Daniel or Sarah, or if I would ever trust anyone again. But for now that was okay. For now all I needed was time. And for the first time in a long time I felt like I had it. The passage of time became my anchor. In the weeks and months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life brick by brick, with no clear blueprint of what I was building. All I knew was that the person I had been, the trusting, adoring wife, the devoted best friend, was gone. I wasn't sure who I was becoming, but I was determined to find out. Therapy became my lifeline. At first, I resisted it, stubbornly clinging to the idea that I could handle this on my own. But during one sleepless night, I scrolled through endless websites and articles about infidelity, betrayal, and healing until I came across the name of a local therapist. Dr. Harper's bio was warm and approachable, and something about her description, specializing in trauma and identity rediscovery, resonated with me. At our first session, I sat across from her in a small sunlit room, my arms crossed defensively. "I don't even know why I'm here," I admitted. "I feel broken, but I don't know if you can fix me." Dr. Harper smiled gently. "We're not here to fix you, Anna. We're here to understand what you're feeling and why. And then together we'll figure out how to move forward." Her words felt like a balm, and over the next few months, I unraveled my pain and anger piece by piece. We talked about Daniel and Sarah, of course, but more than that, we talked about me. My insecurities, my fears, my tendency to put others' needs before my own. For so long, I had defined myself through my relationships, through my ability to be the perfect wife and friend. And now, stripped of those roles, I had to figure out who Anna really was. Daniel reached out a few more times in the months after he moved out, but I kept my boundaries firm. I wasn't ready to see him, to hear more apologies or promises that felt hollow. First, I thought I might never be ready. But one evening in early spring, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The pain was still there, a dull ache that hadn't fully healed, but the sharp edges of my rage had softened. It was time to confront him, not for his sake but for mine. I called him the next day, my hands trembling as I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice cautious and tentative. "Anna." "Yes," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I think we should talk." We met at a quiet park, far from the places we used to frequent together. Daniel looked different, and it took me a moment to pinpoint why. He seemed smaller somehow, not physically but emotionally, as if the weight of his guilt had worn him down. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as we sat on a bench under a sprawling oak tree. I nodded, studying him. For years he had been my everything, the man I built my life around, the man I trusted above all else. Now I saw him for what he truly was, flawed, broken, human. And that realization strangely brought me a sense of clarity. "I don't know what you're expecting from this," I said, my tone calm but firm. "But I want to be clear. I'm not here to forgive you, Daniel. At least, not in the way you might hope." He looked down at his hands, his jaw tightening. "I'm not expecting anything. I wanted to hear what you have to say. Whatever it is." I nodded, appreciating his honesty. "I've spent a lot of time trying to make sense of what happened, of how you could betray me so deeply and still claim to love me. And I realized something. Your actions had nothing to do with me. They weren't about who I was or what I did. They were about you. Your insecurities, your weaknesses, your inability to face yourself." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was selfish. I made choices I'll regret for the rest of my life. But that doesn't change how much I loved you, Anna. How much I still love you." "Love?" I repeated, the word feeling heavy in my mouth. "If this is your version of love, then I don't want it." His face crumpled, but I pressed on. "I deserve more than what you gave me, Daniel. I deserve honesty and respect, and someone who won't use me as a shield for their guilt. And you? You need to figure out who you are without me." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. "Does this mean it's over?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me. "Yes," I said. "It's over." The words felt final but not cruel. They were the truth, and for the first time in a long time I felt at peace with it. Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes as he stood. "I hope you find happiness, Anna," he said softly. "You deserve it." "I hope you find it too," I replied, and I meant it. The months after that meeting were transformative. I threw myself into my work, picked up new hobbies, and even started traveling. I visited places I'd always wanted to see but never had the courage to explore on my own. Paris, Kyoto, the winding coastline of Maine. Each trip felt like a step toward reclaiming my independence, my sense of self. I also started to rebuild my social life, carefully choosing the people I let into my inner circle. Trust was still a challenge, but I found comfort in the kindness of strangers who slowly became friends. One of them, Claire, became a particularly close confidant. She was a coworker who had been through her own heartbreak, and our shared experiences created a bond that felt genuine and untainted. As for Sarah, I never reached out to her again. I occasionally heard about her through mutual acquaintances. She'd moved to a new city, started a new job, but I didn't feel the need to know more. She was a chapter one had closed, and I had no desire to reopen it. 2 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, I found myself walking through the park where Daniel and I had said our final goodbyes. The air was cool, the leaves a vibrant mix of red and gold, and for the first time in a long time I felt content. I wasn't the same person I had been before the betrayal. That version of me was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. I had learned to live with the scars, to accept that they were a part of me but didn't define me. As I sat on a bench sipping a cup of coffee, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Daniel, not at Sarah, not even at myself. The pain of their betrayal had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I had built a new life from the ashes of the old one, and for the first time in years I felt whole. A group of children ran past, their laughter echoing through the park, and I smiled. Life wasn't perfect. Never would be. But it was mine, and that was enough. As I sat there watching the world move around me, I realized this was the ending I never knew I needed. Not a triumphant return to the life I once had, but the quiet, steady beginning of something new. For years I had measured my worth by the roles I played, the devoted wife, the loyal friend, but now for the first time I was simply me. Anna. I thought back to everything I'd endured, the lies, the heartbreak, the nights spent crying into the silence. It hadn't broken me. It had reshaped me, forced me to confront my fears, my insecurities, and my own complicity in losing myself to others' expectations. It had been painful, yes, but it had also been necessary. As I rose from the bench and started walking home, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. The shadows of the past still lingered, but they no longer loomed. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time I wasn't afraid of it. The story of my marriage, of my friendship with Sarah, was over. And that was okay. Some stories are meant to end. But my story was far from finished. And as I walked beneath the canopy of autumn leaves, I felt a quiet, steady hope blossom in my chest. This was my beginning. And it was beautiful.